And so I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Nick Leeder, who's going to talk about what can we do differently to scale predictive maintenance. So Nick's an award-winning coach and advisor. I've interviewed him many times on our podcast. And one thing is for sure, you say beyond the buzzwords, Nick isn't a fan of buzzwords, so there'll be lots of actionable insights here for you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick to take it away. So over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Noel, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to speak with you today about scaling predictive maintenance. Now, just if you give me 2 seconds, I'm going to have a quick go at sharing, and hopefully that all works for everybody. So I think when we start using the phrase scaling, we have to actually put that into context, because scaling means different things to different people. So what do we mean by scale? So we've all got our assets, our critical assets in our facilities, and they've got some level of sensors on them. So it's picking up the vibration, the noise, and we're using predictive maintenance to understand whether something is going to break or not. But as we take that, we also start looking at that asset sits within a larger facility. And in that facility, there are many of those assets. And that's actually the first level of scaling for many companies and many businesses. It is kind of understanding really where can we use this technology else within the plant? And for many people, that's as far as scaling goes. And it depends often on the responsibility of the individual and what they're trying to do. And as I'm going to go through today, I'm going to say the challenges here are no different to the next level of scaling, because that factory also might sit within a network of factories across your business. And again, that is scaling again, but in a different context for different people. So when we think about scaling, we don't just think about scaling within the factory. We think about scaling across all our factories. And again, back to that point, the challenges, whether we're talking about one factory or many factories, are often the same. So scaling's easy, right? I mean, it can't be that hard. It's just putting more sensors on a machine. Now, the reality is it's not quite that easy. And the reason being is, as you grow from just doing 1 or 2 machines into many machines or across many machines across many factories, the challenges are no longer linked really to the technology itself. The challenges start to become around the people. So what gets in the way of scaling? Well, as you understand, as I started to talk about a second ago, the first thing that starts to get in the way are the behaviors. People are, and rightly so, proud about the way they do things and how they, particularly maintenance engineers, they know their assets. They can often walk up to a machine and understand if it's going to break or not, just by listening to the sound. So there's a lot of knowledge, but there's a lot of behaviors in there. Those silos, we have in the business, the maintenance teams, the operations teams, sometimes there's IT teams involved. And that complexity actually means that many times that businesses run in silos across their organization. And that means that communication between those teams, working, collaboration, is a barrier that we have to overcome. And skepticism, as I mentioned, like the behaviors of we've always done it this way, there's a skepticism, particularly with very experienced and knowledgeable people about what can predictive maintenance actually teach them. And we need to kind of understand that to address it. And then think the last one, but it's certainly not the least one, are priorities. Now, often, when I talk to companies about starting their transformation journeys in the business, perhaps looking at predictive maintenance as one of those first steps, there's always the question of, yeah, that's great, but I don't have the time, or there's no budget to do this with. And I'm sure everybody on the call gets and sees that and hears that on a regular basis. So the barriers are quite significant. And that, and when you start thinking about these four things, sorry, I mentioned a moment ago, we go back to that scaling question because they exist within a factory or a plant, but they also exist across all the plants within your business. So we have to overcome them. The other thing is money. Do we actually understand what the cost of downtime is? Well, the problem here is that to try and get people to change, we have to attribute it to a problem we're trying to solve. Downtime is often measured, but the cost of that downtime is very rarely understood. Only 80% of teams lack visibility into the cost of downtime in the business. This was done very recently by Aberdeen Research. That proves that actually the financial pain a company is feeling from not having predictive maintenance, not having the visibility of the downtime they have today is significant, and they're not in that position to start addressing it. So we have to start the change journey. And that change journey, the people, this is not technology, this is people. We have to start demonstrating the value to the people that actually matter. And we need to look at making that really relevant to the people within your organization that are going to use predictive maintenance. And that's not necessarily, by the way, the managers. So what we often hear is, yes, but if we do predictive maintenance, what's that? What's the value of it? What we say often is, well, it helps us reduce downtime. It helps us save money, either that's, not having pumps and, fans on the shelf ready to be swapped over when something goes wrong, or it's just the cost of not being able to run the line because one of the machines is down. But what we need to start also understanding is what the person on the other end is receiving, what they're hearing. And that other person, yes, of course, downtime, money is important, but we have to make it relevant, make it matter for them as well. So we have to start talking about it. Well, look, if we do this, you get back your weekend. You're not coming in on an extra shift to try and get something fixed or working on sociable hours. It's actually giving you back control. So that's an important start to think about. The value isn't always in time and money, but it also can actually apply to the person that they're and on a personal level to the individuals that it impacts. And then we start that winning them over journey. So if we can start talking about value, not just in terms of what I mentioned a second ago, but making it personal to them, then we start winning them over because we have that financial outcome. That's the first, any business will always scale predictive maintenance on a business case. So the outcome is we're making staff more productive. We're stopping the downtimes and planned downtimes by 20%, whatever. But then we also connect that to the emotional things, yeah? That emotional things is like I said a minute ago, it's not just about understanding whether they can get their time back, but also the feel-good factors as well. They fix issues before they become a problem. In maintenance, it is a world of constant firefighting if you don't have predictive maintenance. And at some point, that does become quite a demoralizing environment to be in. So little things like proactively fixing problems really taps into the emotion. And when you get the outcome and the emotion together, you really start to get the buy-in of people. And if you start getting the buy-in of people, then you really start that change journey to scale. So let's go back to this question of value. I'm going to see, I'm probably going to fail quite miserably here. I'm going to talk about downtime here. 1 second of downtime. Now, this is coming from Siemens' own research here and the recent report they've released. How much does 1 second of downtime cost? Feel free to put it in the chat if anybody's got an idea. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So 1 second of downtime is equivalent to 2 Big Macs. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but 1 second for an average small business is around about $13. It's about in a Big Mac. I'm making some generalizations here. Is about $5.50, yeah, but it's about $13 for 1 second. But that scales significantly. So we're deep into the Big Mac index because a Big Mac is ubiquitous. It's not a dollar, you can spend it anywhere in the world. For some larger automotive plants, that runs into the thousands of dollars in seconds, sorry. That's 116 Big Macs for 1 second of downtime. Now, why am I using this? Because actually everybody knows what a Big Mac is. Everybody knows the worth of it. In fact, even The Economist uses the Big Mac index to look at the variable rates across different countries and the inflation. But actually, everybody understands this. This is something and this is a second in an automotive plant. Let's just absorb that for 1 second. Yeah, no pun intended, by the way. That's 116 Big Macs in 1 second for an automotive plant. 1 second of downtime. That's more than I probably use in my entire lifetime. So it probably, we're starting to make some of these values more relatable. But going back to answering that 80% problem, here is some real test points that can start helping on that economic and value proposition. So we need to start that journey and tell the story. You can tell the story using Big Macs. But we have to take those small wins and build that narrative up so they become big momentum in it. Now, that story isn't just we did predictive maintenance and we saved X number of hours. This story has to tell you the journey that you've gone on, the challenges of trying to understand which assets to sensorize and put the sensors on to measure the prediction of vibration, yeah, to understand actually how we went through understanding the first results. Were they results accurate? Did we have to refine the thresholds and parameters that gave us the alerts? Did we get too many alerts and it became confusing? Tell the story and the journey you went through, and tell that story so it shows you how you overcame the challenges yourselves. And don't just keep that story to yourself. Start looking at how you can share that within your organization. Now, are there ways of sharing that on bulletin boards? I don't know, many companies have them physically. I've seen some great examples of going around factories where every time they avoid a downtime event, they put a win on the board. They have the asset. They show what that asset is. They show the amount of time it's been saved, what they did, what the information, what the signals that actually told them it was going to fail, and actually who was involved in stopping it. So it's not just recognizing the success and doing it on the board. It talks about the people that were involved in it as well. So think about that success, and that success is on the shop floor. Communicate on the shop floor, but also look at ways that you can actually elevate that upwards in the organization, because that continuous momentum of success stories and what you have will build more momentum and awareness at leadership level. And I think the final one is recognize the champions. The little story behind this is I recently spent a day with a psychologist, and not on a personal level, but actually on a professional level, understanding how they are training Team GB Olympians actually on performance. And part of that was that for a long time they were struggling to convince the people in Team GB to follow their methodology, to spend time with them. And that flipped when one of them won gold. And that person was saying the thing that made the difference was spending time with this psychologist. At that point in time, that psychologist no longer had to try and sell themselves. That other person was selling it for them. That champion was actually the advocate in their business, talking about how great it was. So who would be your champions? How would you recognize them within your business. And often I see predictive maintenance projects coming and being driven like a project. It is a project. So it starts here and it finishes here and then we're done. But it isn't. It's a continuous journey. And it's a journey that really starts taking a new mindset. If done well, that scaling factor creates a new mindset within the organization. And I mean, that could be, as I said, let's go back to that scale question. That could be just the teams on the shop floor in your plant, or it could be just the maintenance team, for example, or it could be different plants working together and working in a different way. But the things I see very differently, that shift, it starts driving a level of curiosity within the business. They start looking at this and going, actually, there's something there that I didn't know existed. I'm now starting to see why things might be failing. It actually starts bringing forward the visibility of those problems within the organization. And actually, that visibility can happen on many different levels. It can happen at the expert level, the VAs, the VA2s, the VA3s, with a detailed spectral analysis of actually understanding what the potential failures are. That visibility can then be used at an operational level. So the maintenance person can actually see, well, what's the health of my assets? And I don't have to go hunting around. It's on there on a single page in a single place. But it will also elevate that same information up to management level. So the management gets an overall visibility of what the health of the plant is, or what the health of all the critical assets are. So that visibility and that curiosity really starts driving the next thing, which is then starting to take ownership. You actually create and allow people and empower people to act, to make sure that they feel responsible and accountable for ensuring the performance of the facility and production. And that ownership, when those three things start happening together, curiosity, the visibility, and the ownership, you really know that you're on that journey of continuous improvement driven by predictive maintenance. And that journey of scaling is healthy and is ready to start, if not already started. So the things that really drive that from a pilot, because some of those things really exist even in a pilot stage, and then look at scale and performance, are four key things. And these are the four things I've seen repeatedly when I've worked with predictive maintenance in my career. First thing is a standard level of standardization. How you go about using predictive maintenance, you should be using the same processes, the same approaches, but also the same technology, because that allows you to get that visibility I mentioned earlier on. You have to think about how maintenance and predictive maintenance actually is connected in the broader processes within the business. So you have to connect those processes together. You have to think about how it works, not just in maintenance, but how it works perhaps with procurement and planning and the other teams, and making sure that the scheduling and more dynamic scheduling you can now do, because you can now predict when things can fail. How do those things work together? So it's not just a maintenance play, it's a connected play within production and manufacturing. The next thing I've seen, which is a real mind shift change, is also learning loops. I would love to say everything in my career I've got right first time. Alas, that hasn't happened. And this presentation may be testament to one of those occasions. But one of the things here is that learning loops are really, really critical when something doesn't go right. So perhaps you had a failure on the shop floor using predictive maintenance. Did somebody not actually pay attention to the alert? Were the thresholds set wrong? Was there something different? Were you producing something different that caused it to fail? So take that learning, get feedback on it, and then fix it, because that will make you better. And that, again, we talk about continuous improvement in this world. And then start bringing everybody into that process. So on your line walks, on your everything that you do, make sure that predictive maintenance, that asset health, becomes absolutely visible. Get everybody involved in this, from the operators, from the maintenance teams, all the way through also to the management teams. So everybody can build that into their daily routines, and it then becomes institutionalized, if that's the right word to use, in how everybody works together. So how do you start? I'm going to throw the challenge back here. You need to become a change maker. You want things to scale, you've got to take the first steps yourself. So are you on this call asking the right questions? So what can you try differently? And using some of the things I've talked about today, have you thought about, okay, if I thought about this and I thought about things in a different way, how could I do this differently? How could I use this to start scaling within what I'm doing within my plant, perhaps even to other plants? What will be the story that you will tell next? What's the journey? That journey, it's not just about we did this and this is the outcome. How can you talk about this? How can you make your find your champions? And what will the first step you will take from the back of this presentation? So evolving scaling, it's hard. Yeah, it's much, much harder than starting the projects off. So we talked about it a second ago, but you need to communicate that why. That why isn't just about the time and the money. It's about making it personal to the people that it impacts in predictive maintenance. So make that why about actually winning the time, getting control back of their time, being proactive and fixing things rather than just constantly firefighting. These are such an emotional connections that, combined with the financial benefits of predictive maintenance, really get you to scale within the business. I talked about this a lot, and I'm going to keep hanging on about it. Celebrate success. Make sure that wins are recognized, wins are publicized, and the people involved in those wins are recognized through it as well. And that helps this point here, which is about building the culture. When we talked about being curious, getting the visibility, but not being afraid of it. Also recognizing that you don't get everything right first time and actually showing how you're improving things. That's the culture that will allow you to scale predictive maintenance within your facility. And that allows you to take pilots of predictive maintenance or very small deployments of predictive maintenance and drive them to scale within your plant or even further afield. Thank you very much. I'm open to any questions now.
Thank you, Nick. That was really good, really interesting. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I thought I'd start because I've written down a couple of questions myself, just to get us started. In terms of your background, so we went straight into the nuts and bolts of the presentation. I think people would be really interested to hear what your background, what your personal experiences are working on these projects and advising all various organisations on that. Is there anything you can draw from your own personal insight?
So look, I've spent 30 years, almost 30 years. You probably can tell by the slightly thinning top and grey hair, but I've always worked at the intersection of technology and business, but on the business side of things in engineering and manufacturing. So in my career, I've run production lines, I've moved production out offshore production, and I've worked for companies such as SKF and Dyson, where I've owned these transformations at corporate level. SKF, there's 113 factories across 44 different countries. So I've been really at the forefront of getting manufacturing businesses to do something different, to use technology, but to scale it. So that experience, coupled with I've worked as a consultant, and I still do work independently as a consultant, and I've worked for other technology companies in this space. I've really got a detailed understanding of the manufacturing operating environment, as well as things like predictive maintenance. And it drives me crazy in what I do today when I just hear so many Industry 4 buzzwords that are flying around. I'm sure everybody's got hold of Industry 5 now as well because they couldn't implement Industry 4. So we've moved on a digit already. We're all in the AI golden age right now. So, all these buzzwords, actually, it's always about, can you make things safely, on time, to quantity, and profitably? And things like predictive maintenance really have a profound effect. So in the work I do now, I work with manufacturers across the world, from some very, very big multinational businesses to actually some less than kind of 50-person manufacturing startups, where I help them understand what technology can actually bring to their organization, the value, and help guide them and coach them. I call it co-pilot them, to get them to value, not to technology deployment, but to value. And that's a very different piece. And that's why scaling for something like predictive maintenance is really important.
Excellent, excellent. And if we go into the chat, so there's a question here about Siemens' approach to predictive maintenance, and I don't think we need to go specifically into that, but maybe we could have a slightly different angle on it. So you mentioned you talk to large multinationals and smaller customers. Where does the approach to predictive maintenance differ from your perspective?
Well, traditionally, maintenance is the lowest level is break fix. Yeah, we keep running it until something breaks, and then we repair it or we swap it. Then companies have evolved to planned maintenance. The problem with planned maintenance is you're probably over maintaining or under maintaining on that basis. And companies realize that evolution of the maintenance journey is kind of inefficient. And that's driven them to say, well, look, how can we be more efficient with maintenance? It's a cost. Quite often it is actually seen as a cost to the business, not a benefit to the business. And I see a lot of companies start that journey of, well, look, let's do a couple of machines. Let's put it on and let's bleed it. That skepticism I talked about earlier on. So a lot of companies start that journey off by going, well, look, we'll choose a platform. We're here today with Siemens. That's one of the many platforms out there. And we'll start measuring and we'll start understanding. And does it help me stop things breaking? The problem is it always feels a little bit like an insurance policy, isn't it? Because you stop something breaking, it didn't break. Therefore, you didn't really have a cost. You avoided a cost. That's an insurance. And I think that's where actually understanding that time, 80% of companies don't actually understand the cost of downtime, so the true cost of downtime. And the cost of downtime, it's interesting. I was doing something the other week, and it's like, I know one facility saved 2,700 hours of downtime. 2,700 hours. That equated to 11.4 million of benefit to the business, because the downtime itself wasn't really the cost. And this is why the burgers is quite important. The downtime wasn't the cost of, okay, we had to put a new pump on. That's the cost in maintenance, yeah? Yeah, it's the maintenance cost of how much labor was involved. The real cost is actually you couldn't produce anything in that time. Therefore, you had product. And if you're working in a capacity constrained environment, you couldn't produce product you needed to sell. Perhaps you failed on OTIF. There's a downstream effect of this. So it's understanding that, that connection I talked about as well. Understanding the true cost is what starts that process off.
Excellent. And actually related to that, and by the way, we've got about 5 minutes left for questions as well. So if anyone's got any questions now, please put them in the chat and we can prioritize them. We actually have a question about what would you do during or before a pilot in order to be ready to scale efficiently. Sorry. So how do you lay the groundwork for scaling, I guess is one way to put it.
Well, let's look at why pilots fail, and then we'll turn the question around perhaps. I've worked in the technology space in manufacturing and engineering. I've seen pilots, and we all hear this phrase called pilot purgatory, which is, we've got pilot, we prove value, but we never scale it. And the question you have to ask is why? Now, obviously, we've got the organizational barriers I talked about. as well. These are often some of the biggest challenges which drive you, but that's kind of, you get really into that during the pilot. The problem I often see is you start the pilot on something that won't scale itself. So, rather than choosing that same compressor or the same fan or the same pump, which you have 30 of in your facility and you've standardized across your other 10 facilities, they'll choose something that they know is easy. But it's actually a use case that doesn't exist anywhere else. Or maybe only exists 1 or 2 times. So one of the first things I would look at is, what are the assets that are worth sensorizing? And we'll come on to that in a second, actually. And how often do we use them? How many of them are there? Because that is the route to scale. You set your path to scaling from the beginning. And then the other thing is, and then I'll come on to that, which is what assets are important? What are your critical assets? I often also hear that people look at the bottlenecks in the production line and use that as the basis. And it isn't. It could be that one fan that isn't actually on the production line, but maybe connected to your HVAC systems, that if that goes down, you have to stop production. It's not a critical process step. It's a supporting thing. So what are those critical assets that are essential for you to keep running? And if they go down, it's either really costly or costly to replace, or timely to replace. Either it's a long lead time to replace it, or you have to keep it a spare part on the shelf. So looking at those variables, there's a cost element, there's a criticality element, but there's also a volume element. And then I would also get your supplier involved early on in that change management journey as well. So, in this, let's keep the context in terms of Siemens. If you're doing Siemens here, get them involved in that journey, help them to start winning over the hearts and minds of people, because they can show you, the teams that get involved, the maintenance teams, what this would look like, what would be the benefits before you've actually deployed it. So you start that change journey and you start understanding some of the skepticisms and some of those barriers before you start the pilot.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. I think we have time for one more question that's just popped in. Might have to make it very quick because we are running short time. So in your experience, why do maintenance and operation leaders rarely quantify the opportunity cost of downtime in financial terms? And who should actually own that responsibility in an organization?
So there's 2 things. I think, first of all, actually, there's one thing. Their KPIs, which could be OEE, could be unplanned downtime, that's their measure. They're typically measured on a value in hours or percentage on those sort of things. Yeah. That KPI very rarely, that's an operational KPI. That very rarely gets translated into financial KPIs at board level, at CFO level. So what I see a lot is a disconnect between operational KPIs, which are 100% valid, but a true connection to the financial implication further upstream. And that's a disconnect often that's happening between financial KPIs and operational KPIs. There you go.
Fantastic. And right on cue as well, Nick. So that's fantastic. But yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, Nick. All of your contact details are on the screen. I think we're going to share some links in the chat as well, and we'll do that in a second.